Atlas stopped so suddenly that Cole nearly walked straight into him. The German shepherd stood rigid on the narrow mountain trail, ears forward, staring through the trees where a rectangle of dark glass seemed to grow directly from the rock. Cole wiped melting snow from his beard and followed the dog's gaze. At first, he thought it was another shadow beneath the pines. Then he saw a roofline. Stone. Timber. A chimney buried against the mountainside. Well, he murmured, that's new. Wind pushed hard through the lodgepole pines, making their trunks groan above him. Snow had already soaked through the knees of his faded cargo pants, and every breath carried the sharp smell of resin and frozen earth. Atlas shook ice from his sable coat and moved downhill. Cole followed. At 41, the former Navy SEAL owned almost everything he had in the pack strapped across his shoulders. 2 changes of clothes, a sleeping bag, a battered camp stove, Atlas's collapsible bowl, the old K9 leash wrapped around one side pocket. For 11 months, home had meant whichever place allowed them to remain dry until morning. Tonight, even that modest requirement was disappearing beneath fresh snow. The house offered another possibility. Its front wall was built from rough timber and fieldstone, but most of the structure vanished backward into the mountain itself. Frost covered the windows from inside. No tire tracks marked the narrow access road. No smoke rose from the chimney. Cole climbed onto the porch and knocked. Hello. Only wind answered. He knocked harder. Atlas sniffed beneath the door, then looked up at him. Yeah, I know. Cole tried the handle. Locked. He circled the building, calling twice more, checking the windows for movement. Nothing. By the time he returned, daylight had thinned to blue-gray and the temperature was dropping fast. Cole pulled a compact pry bar from his pack. Temporary shelter, he told Atlas. We leave it better than we found it. The weather-swollen door resisted, wood grinding against the frame, before finally opening with a deep crack. Cold, stale air rolled outward carrying dust, old cedar, and the mineral smell of stone. Cole stepped inside first. Atlas followed close behind. The room was larger than expected. A wood stove stood near one wall. Shelves held canned food, lanterns, and neatly stacked firewood. A heavy table faced broad windows overlooking the valley. Nothing looked ransacked. Nothing looked recently used. Cole shut the door against the wind and checked the rooms methodically. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, pantry, bathroom with a gravity-fed water tank. No occupants. No obvious signs anyone had been there for days. We get warm. Morning comes, we move. Atlas watched him. Cole started the wood stove using split pine from the rack. Soon flames snapped behind the iron door, throwing amber light across the stone floor. He removed his wet outer layer, hung it near the stove, and poured kibble into Atlas's bowl. Dinner. The shepherd did not come. Cole looked over his shoulder. Atlas stood at the far end of the room, facing a rough interior wall where the house disappeared into the mountain. Atlas. No response. The dog pressed his nose against a narrow seam between 2 stones. His breathing changed. Short. Focused. Cole carried the bowl over and set it down. Atlas ignored the food. He sniffed higher, then lower, tracing perhaps 3 feet of wall before returning to exactly the same spot. Leave it. Atlas had obeyed that command in noise, darkness, crowds, and chaos. This time he remained planted. One paw lifted and scraped once against the stone. Cole crouched beside him. The wall felt cold beneath his fingertips, far colder than the room around it. Atlas pressed his ear against the seam. Then the shepherd looked at Cole and gave one low, urgent whine. Cole slowly lowered his hand from the stone. Outside, wind battered the mountain. Inside, the fire cracked behind them. And Atlas refused to move from the wall. Cole left the food beside Atlas and returned to the stove. Your call. He expected the shepherd to reconsider once the room warmed. Atlas did not. 10 minutes later, flames clicked behind the iron door, and the temperature near the table had climbed enough for Cole's fingers to stop aching. Yet Atlas remained against the stone wall. The dog's kibble sat untouched. Firelight moved across his sable coat, while wind moaned around the buried roofline, carrying faint vibrations through the mountain itself. Cole poured water into a dented metal cup and watched steam rise. Atlas, come. The shepherd turned his head. His amber eyes met Cole's. Then he faced the wall again. Cole set the cup down. In all their years together, Atlas had ignored a direct command only when another signal mattered more. Cole crossed the room and crouched beside him. The stone was rough beneath his palm, its mortar gritty and cold. Atlas pushed his nose into the same narrow seam, inhaled twice, then pressed one ear flat against it. Cole leaned closer. Nothing. Only the stove snapping behind him and sleet ticking against the windows. Show me. Atlas stood immediately. His nose traveled along the wall toward the floor, stopped beneath a shoulder-high block, then returned to the original seam. One paw scraped lightly. Dust trickled onto the stone floor. Cole brushed it aside. A thread of cold air touched the back of his fingers. He frowned. The house had been built into solid mountain. There should not have been an outside draft behind an interior wall. He fetched his flashlight and angled the beam across the mortar. A hairline gap became visible, running vertically between two stones. Atlas sniffed it again, faster now. Cole placed his ear against the wall. Still nothing. Could be a service cavity. He stood and searched the kitchen and pantry, looking for access panels, vents, anything connecting to the rear of the structure. He found none. When he returned, Atlas had lowered himself onto the floor directly beneath the seam. Not resting, guarding. His ears stayed upright. His eyes never left the stone. Cole unfolded his sleeping bag beside the stove. I'm not tearing apart somebody's house because you found a mouse. Atlas remained motionless. An hour passed. The storm strengthened. Snow struck the windows with a dry hiss, and the cedar smoke from the stove left a warm, resinous scent throughout the room. Cole ate half a protein bar, then carried Atlas's bowl to him. The shepherd turned away from it. Seriously? Cole touched his neck. Atlas rose abruptly and placed his nose against the seam again. This time his body stiffened. Cole heard it too. Scrape. Faint. Somewhere behind the stone. He killed the lantern. The room fell quiet except for the low burn of the stove. Another sound came through the wall. Scrape. Pause. Then something softer. Almost a knock. Atlas gave one sharp bark. Cole grabbed the pry bar and flashlight. The shelter keeping them alive suddenly mattered less than whatever Atlas had refused to abandon behind that wall. Cole wedged the steel tip carefully into the cold mortar seam. All right, partner, he whispered. We open it. The first stone moved less than half an inch before Atlas shoved his nose toward the opening. Cole caught the shepherd by the harness and pulled him back. Not yet. Grit scattered across the floor, sharp beneath Cole's knuckles, and a ribbon of air slipped through the widened seam. It smelled nothing like the warm cedar room behind them. Wet limestone, old timber, cold water. Somewhere deeper inside the mountain, something scraped again. Atlas answered with a low whine. Cole studied the wall under his flashlight. The stones around the seam were smaller than the surrounding blocks, fitted almost like an old repair rather than structural masonry. He tapped one with the pry bar. Hollow. There's space back there. Atlas already knew. The dog stood with his chest nearly touching Cole's shoulder, ears aimed at the wall. Cole removed another loose stone, then another, working slowly so the section above would remain supported. Dust coated his sleeves. The metallic scrape of the pry bar mixed with the soft roar of the stove and the storm pressing against the windows. After 20 minutes, a black opening appeared wide enough for Cole's hand. His flashlight beam vanished into it. Atlas inhaled hard and pawed once at the floor. Wait. Cole pushed the light through. Rough timber framing stood several feet beyond the stone face. Behind it was a narrow passage descending into darkness. A rusted metal conduit followed one wall. Water glistened along the rock beneath it. Not a hidden room. A maintenance corridor. The house had been built around access to the mountain itself. Then came the sound again. 3 faint knocks. Cole stopped working. Atlas froze. Cole leaned toward the opening. Hello. Nothing. He waited. Water dripped somewhere beyond the wall with slow, hollow ticks. Then, scrape. Knock. Knock. Atlas barked once, so close to the opening that the sound punched through the passage. A moment later something answered. Not words. A weak, uneven sound from far inside. Cole's face changed. He set down the pry bar and immediately widened the opening. Stone by stone, he cleared enough space for Atlas to pass without scraping his back. Cold air poured into the room now, dragging the temperature down around their legs. Cole returned to his pack and clipped the old K9 leash onto Atlas's harness. He added a headlamp, rope, gloves, and the small first aid pouch. The warm room behind him suddenly looked less like shelter and more like a lifeline they might need to reach again. Close search. Atlas entered first. Cole followed sideways through the opening. The passage narrowed to barely 3 feet across. Moisture slicked the rock walls, and the beam from Cole's headlamp caught mineral crystals sparkling like frost. Their footsteps sounded strangely close, swallowed almost immediately by the mountain. 20 feet in, Atlas stopped and sniffed a timber brace. Then he pulled forward. Cole let him lead. The corridor bent left. The smell of wet stone grew stronger. Somewhere overhead, runoff murmured through unseen cracks. They descended another 15 yards before finding the obstruction. Broken timber and loose rock filled most of the passage from floor to ceiling. Atlas lunged toward it. Cole tightened the leash. Easy. The shepherd lowered his muzzle to a narrow gap near the floor. His tail went rigid. Cole crouched beside him and aimed the flashlight through. Hello? Can you hear me? Silence. Then a breath. A human breath. Cole pressed closer. My name is Cole. I'm inside the house. Are you hurt? For several seconds, only dripping water answered. Then a man's voice came through the rocks, thin and exhausted. Don't leave. Atlas dropped onto his belly against the collapsed wall and refused to move. Cole put one hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady vibration of his breathing beneath the harness. The wall upstairs had never been the problem. It had been the only place Atlas could hear someone still alive behind it. Cole kept one hand on Atlas's harness and studied the collapse before touching a single rock. His headlamp threw a narrow white beam across splintered timber, wet stone, and muddy water creeping between his boots. The passage smelled of limestone and rotting wood. Somewhere beyond the obstruction, the trapped man breathed in short, uneven pulls. Stay with me, Cole called. What's your name? A pause. Walter. Hayes. Atlas pushed his muzzle toward the floor-level gap. Walter, I'm going to make room. Don't move unless I tell you. Cole tested the nearest stones individually. 2 shifted easily. A third carried weight from a cracked timber above, so he left it untouched. He removed debris slowly, widening the opening while Atlas remained pressed beside him, listening whenever Walter fell silent. Cold water dripped from the ceiling onto Cole's neck. Each metallic scrape of the pry bar echoed deep into the mountain. After several minutes, Atlas suddenly pawed toward the right side. Cole redirected his light. Behind a broken board was a narrow space untouched by the heavier collapse. Good boy. He cleared loose rock from it, then flattened himself and crawled through. His jacket dragged across gritty stone. Atlas followed immediately. Beyond the collapse, the passage opened into a cramped maintenance chamber. Walter lay against the rock wall beneath a fallen shelf, gray hair damp with sweat, one leg pinned awkwardly beneath scattered lumber. An old lantern beside him had burned out. You came from the house? Walter asked. Atlas found you. The old man looked toward the shepherd. Atlas crossed the chamber and lowered himself against Walter's side without command. Walter's trembling hand disappeared into the thick fur at his neck. Knew I heard a dog. Cole checked him carefully. Walter was alert, but cold enough that his fingers shook against Atlas's coat. His leg could not safely bear weight. Cole opened the first aid pouch, wrapped him in an emergency blanket, then inspected the debris around his boot. How long? Since yesterday afternoon. Came down to check a leak before the storm. Water struck the stone nearby with another hollow tap. Walter glanced upward. Mountain runoff gets worse when the temperature rises. Cole heard it then. Not individual drops anymore, but a thin, continuous trickle behind the rock. Atlas lifted his head. Cole freed Walter's leg from the loose timber, but when he tried to help him sit forward, the old man's face tightened and his hand clamped around Cole's sleeve. Walking him through the narrow opening was impossible. Cole looked back toward the collapse. The route he had crawled through was barely large enough for Atlas. He needed another way. There's a wall in your main room, Cole said. Stone patch. Is this chamber behind it? Walter nodded slowly. About 15 feet. Old service access was sealed years ago. Cole looked at Atlas. The shepherd had spent hours refusing to leave that exact wall. Not because the sound ended there. Because Walter did. Cole clipped the leash free from Atlas's harness. Stay with him. Atlas remained beside Walter. Cole crawled back through the gap alone. When he reached the warm room, the fire had burned low and freezing air poured through the opening they had made. He fed the stove, grabbed rope, blankets, a handsaw, and every usable length of timber he could find. Then he faced the wall Atlas had chosen from the beginning. Walter was somewhere directly behind it. Cole set the saw on the table and tightened his gloves. He was no longer trying to discover what the mountain was hiding. He was going to bring a man through that wall. Cole did not attack the wall blindly. He measured it. From the passage bend to Walter's chamber, from the chamber back toward the house, then again across the stone face Atlas had chosen. The fire popped behind him, throwing orange light over chalk marks while cold air streamed through the first opening and carried the smell of wet limestone into the cedar warm room. Atlas, Cole called through the gap. A bark answered from inside the mountain. Then Walter's weak voice followed. He's still here. Cole rested his forehead against the cold stone for 1 second. Good. Keep him there. He returned through the maintenance passage carrying rope, 2 blankets, the handsaw, and short lengths of split timber. Water now covered parts of the floor in a shallow black sheen. It slipped around Cole's boots with an icy hiss, and somewhere deeper in the rock came the steady murmur of runoff. Atlas remained pressed against Walter's side. The old man's fingers rested in the shepherd's coat, trembling less beneath the emergency blanket. Cole laid out the supplies. I can open the sealed access from the house side, but I need this route stable while I work. Walter glanced toward the dripping ceiling. Those old braces won't like the water. Neither do I. Cole wedged fresh timber beneath the weakest crossbeam, tightening each brace until the wood complained but held. Then he looped the rope through Atlas's harness and secured a small canvas pouch containing water, a flashlight, and another thermal wrap. Take. Atlas gripped the pouch handle. House. The shepherd disappeared through the narrow gap. Minutes later, Cole heard claws returning over stone. Atlas emerged carrying the pouch again, this time with the flashlight and extra wrap Cole had left near the opening. Walter gave a dry little laugh. Better employee than most men I hired. Atlas dropped the pouch beside Cole and immediately returned to Walter. Cole tested the support beam once more. A dull crack sounded overhead. Everyone froze. Fine grit rained onto his shoulder. Water began running faster along the right wall. Cole aimed his light upward. The temperature outside must have shifted enough for snowmelt to enter the mountain. The passage was changing. Waiting was no longer an option. He crawled back toward the house with Atlas behind him, intending to start opening the sealed access. Halfway through, Atlas stopped. Cole turned. Come. The shepherd looked back toward Walter. Atlas, come. 1 step forward. Then another backward. Walter's voice carried faintly through the collapse. Let him stay. Cole's jaw tightened. He unclipped the rope from Atlas's harness. Walter, if that water rises, you keep your hand on him. I'll follow his bark. Atlas immediately turned and crawled back toward the old man. Cole watched his tail vanish into darkness. For years, the dog had followed him through every doorway. Tonight, Atlas chose someone else who could not leave on his own. Cole returned to the main room alone. The warmth from the stove struck his face, but the floor near the wall was already damp from the cold passage air. He positioned the timber braces, marked the safest section, and set the saw teeth against an old wooden frame concealed behind loosened stone. From somewhere beyond the wall came Atlas's bark. Once, twice, a fixed point in the mountain. Cole began cutting. Stone dust mixed with sweat along his hands. The wall shuddered under each careful pull. Then the bark stopped. Cole froze with the saw halfway through the timber. Atlas. Nothing. He pressed his ear to the wall. A heavy crack rolled through the passage, followed by the sound of falling rock. Cole dropped the saw and grabbed the pry bar. Atlas. One bark finally answered, muffled, farther away, but steady. Cole tightened both hands around the steel. The mountain had just closed the route he had used to reach Walter. Now there was only one way left to bring either of them home. Through the wall Atlas had refused to leave. Cole did not attack the wall blindly. He measured it. From the passage bend to Walter's chamber, from the chamber back toward the house, then again across the stone face Atlas had chosen. The fire popped behind him, throwing orange light over chalk marks while cold air streamed through the first opening and carried the smell of wet limestone into the cedar warm room. Atlas, Cole called through the gap. A bark answered from inside the mountain. Then Walter's weak voice followed. He's still here. Cole rested his forehead against the cold stone for 1 second. Good. Keep him there. He returned through the maintenance passage carrying rope, 2 blankets, the handsaw, and short lengths of split timber. Water now covered parts of the floor in a shallow black sheen. It slipped around Cole's boots with an icy hiss, and somewhere deeper in the rock came the steady murmur of runoff. Atlas remained pressed against Walter's side. The old man's fingers rested in the shepherd's coat, trembling less beneath the emergency blanket. Cole laid out the supplies. I can open the sealed access from the house side, but I need this route stable while I work. Walter glanced toward the dripping ceiling. Those old braces won't like the water. Neither do I. Cole wedged fresh timber beneath the weakest crossbeam, tightening each brace until the wood complained but held. Then he looped the rope through Atlas's harness and secured a small canvas pouch containing water, a flashlight, and another thermal wrap. Take. Atlas gripped the pouch handle. House. The shepherd disappeared through the narrow gap. Minutes later, Cole heard claws returning over stone. Atlas emerged carrying the pouch again, this time with the flashlight and extra wrap Cole had left near the opening. Walter gave a dry little laugh. Better employee than most men I hired. Atlas dropped the pouch beside Cole and immediately returned to Walter. Cole tested the support beam once more. A dull crack sounded overhead. Everyone froze. Fine grit rained onto his shoulder. Water began running faster along the right wall. Cole aimed his light upward. The temperature outside must have shifted enough for snowmelt to enter the mountain. The passage was changing. Waiting was no longer an option. He crawled back toward the house with Atlas behind him, intending to start opening the sealed access. Halfway through, Atlas stopped. Cole turned. Come. The shepherd looked back toward Walter. Atlas, come. One step forward, then another backward. Walter's voice carried faintly through the collapse. Let him stay. Cole's jaw tightened. He unclipped the rope from Atlas's harness. Walter, if that water rises, you keep your hand on him. I'll follow his bark. Atlas immediately turned and crawled back toward the old man. Cole watched his tail vanish into darkness. For years, the dog had followed him through every doorway. Tonight, Atlas chose someone else who could not leave on his own. Cole returned to the main room alone. The warmth from the stove struck his face, but the floor near the wall was already damp from the cold passage air. He positioned the timber braces, marked the safest section, and set the saw teeth against an old wooden frame concealed behind loosened stone. From somewhere beyond the wall came Atlas's bark. Once, twice, a fixed point in the mountain. Cole began cutting. Stone dust mixed with sweat along his hands. The wall shuddered under each careful pull. Then the bark stopped. Cole froze with the saw halfway through the timber. Atlas. Nothing. He pressed his ear to the wall. A heavy crack rolled through the passage, followed by the sound of falling rock. Cole dropped the saw and grabbed the pry bar. Atlas. One bark finally answered, muffled, farther away, but steady. Cole tightened both hands around the steel. The mountain had just closed the route he had used to reach Walter. Now there was only one way left to bring either of them home. Through the wall Atlas had refused to leave. Cole drove the pry bar beneath the loosened stone and leaned his weight into it. The block shifted with a grinding groan, spilling gray dust across his boots. Behind him, the stove snapped and hissed, but cold air rolled from the wall hard enough to lift the hair along his wrists. Atlas. A bark came back through the mountain. Cole counted the seconds between the sound and its echo. Close. He removed another stone, then another, working around the timber frame instead of weakening it. Sweat soaked the collar of his jacket despite the freezing draft. His palms burned against the steel. From behind the wall came a faint scrape, followed by Walter coughing. Cole, right here. He pressed his mouth near the opening. How's the water? Walter took too long to answer. Ankle deep now. Cole looked at the damp floor beneath him. A thin stream had begun leaking through the mortar. The mountain was filling the chamber faster than before. Keep Atlas beside you. That dog hasn't moved 6 inches. Cole almost smiled. Then the wall gave a sharp wooden pop. He stepped back. The concealed frame had taken part of the house's interior load for decades. Removing it carelessly could bring stone down instead of opening a doorway. Cole grabbed 2 lengths of split timber, wedged them beneath the overhead beam, and hammered them tight using the flat side of the pry bar. Each strike rang through the room. Atlas barked after every blow. Cole answered each time. Still here, buddy. He sawed through the lower section of the old frame. The teeth rasped against dry wood while wet stone chilled his knees through his pants. At last, a rectangular section loosened. Cole kicked its bottom edge inward. It fell with a dull crash. Blackness opened beyond it. Then Atlas's muzzle appeared through the dust. Cole dropped to one knee. Hey! Atlas pushed forward, but stopped halfway and looked behind him. No, Cole said quietly. I know. The shepherd backed into the chamber again. Cole widened the opening until it was nearly 3 feet across, then crawled through with rope and blankets. The air inside was colder than before, heavy with wet earth and mineral water. Walter sat against the wall with Atlas braced beside him. Water covered the floor around their boots and paws. Cole wrapped the rope beneath Walter's arms and secured it with a rescue knot. We're going straight through. Atlas first. He pointed toward the opening. House. Atlas did not move. Atlas. House. The shepherd looked at Walter. Cole understood. Fine. Together. He moved Walter inch by inch, supporting the injured leg while Atlas walked backward beside them, never breaking contact with Walter's hand. At the opening, Cole climbed through first and pulled while Walter pushed with his good leg. Atlas stayed behind until Walter's shoulders cleared the stone. Then another deep crack rolled through the mountain. Water surged around Atlas's paws. Now, Cole shouted. Atlas launched through the opening as loose grit rained behind him. Cole dragged Walter clear and rolled him onto the blankets beside the stove. Atlas immediately pressed against the old man's chest, soaked for steaming faintly in the firelight. Cole reached for the wall opening to brace it, and stopped. A section of stone above the doorway had shifted nearly an inch. The house itself was beginning to settle. Walter caught his sleeve. Cole. His voice was barely louder than the wind outside. This place won't hold if that support goes. Cole looked from the failing wall to Atlas, then toward the front door buried somewhere beyond the storm. Shelter had saved them once. Now staying inside it could bury all three. Cole grabbed his pack and stood. Then we leave before the mountain decides for us. Cole killed the stove before they moved. The iron door clicked shut, and almost immediately the room lost its soft cedar warmth. Wind pressed against the buried house with a low animal moan, while fine stone dust whispered from the damaged wall onto the floor. Atlas stood between Walter and the front door, soaked coat dark beneath the lantern glow, watching Cole tighten the straps on his pack. Can you put weight on that leg? Cole asked. Walter tried. His boot touched the floor, his knee buckled, and Atlas stepped beneath his hand before Cole could reach him. Walter gripped the shepherd's harness. That answers it. Cole crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, blowing snow erased the mountainside in white sheets. Visibility was barely 30 feet. Leaving the house meant cold, darkness, and an injured man who could not walk. Staying meant trusting a wall that had already moved. Another muted crack traveled through the stone beneath their feet. Atlas turned instantly toward the damaged section. Cole did not. He had made his choice. He stripped the blankets from the cot, wrapped Walter's injured leg, then lashed 2 sturdy wooden poles alongside the canvas sleeping bag to form a narrow drag litter. The fabric rasped across the stone floor as Cole tested it. You ride. I pull. Walter looked toward the door. In that. Cole helped him onto the litter and secured the blanket across his chest. Atlas moved to Walter's left side without being told. Cole opened the front door. Cold hit the room like a physical blow. Snow hissed across the threshold, carrying the clean metallic smell of ice and pine. Cole lowered his head and pulled. The litter crossed the threshold inch by inch. Atlas stayed beside Walter, shoulder brushing the canvas whenever it tilted. 20 yards from the house, the wind swallowed nearly every sound except Cole's breathing and the runners dragging through crusted snow. His headlamp illuminated only a spinning tunnel of white. Walter called over the wind, roads downhill southeast. Cole checked the compass clipped to his pack strap. Road's no good if we walk off a ledge getting there. Atlas suddenly stopped. The leash snapped tight. Cole turned. Come. Atlas stared uphill, not toward the house, toward a line of dark spruce trees barely visible through the storm. Then he pulled sideways. Cole resisted. Atlas' heel. The shepherd planted all 4 paws and looked directly at him. Walter raised his head from the litter. Trust him. Cole stared at Atlas for 1 second, then unclipped the leash from his belt. Lead. Atlas moved into the trees. The route descended more gently there, protected from the worst wind. Cole followed, dragging Walter through powder nearly knee-deep. Branches scratched his jacket, and snow dropped in cold clumps from the spruce boughs. but the ground remained solid beneath his boots. After several hundred yards, Atlas stopped beside a narrow depression in the snow. Cole swept his glove across it. Wood. A buried trail marker. The old service route. Walter touched the post. This goes to the county access road. Atlas had found what the storm had hidden. They continued until the trees opened onto a wider track. Then a deep concussion rolled from behind them. Cole turned. Through the blowing snow, a pale cloud rose from the mountainside where the house stood. Part of the stone facade had given way. Walter stared at it without speaking. Cole tightened his grip on the litter handles. Atlas looked once toward the mountain, then pressed forward against Cole's leg. The wall had brought them together. Now it was gone. Ahead, far below through the trees, two yellow lights moved slowly along the county road. Cole lifted his flashlight and flashed 3 deliberate signals into the darkness. The lights stopped. Then they turned toward him. The yellow lights belonged to a county snowplow, and when its diesel engine finally growled through the trees, Cole lowered the flashlight only long enough to grab the litter again. The wind cut across the access road, sharp with exhaust and frozen pine, while amber hazard lights painted the snow in slow rotating bands. Here, Cole shouted. The driver braked 20 yards away. Atlas barked once and ran beside the litter as Cole dragged Walter toward the plow. Within minutes, the cab heater was roaring. Wet wool, dog fur, and diesel filled the cramped space. Walter sat wrapped in blankets with his injured leg elevated while Atlas pressed against his knee. Cole remained near the door, snow melting from his beard and dripping onto the rubber floor mat. The driver radioed county dispatch. A rescue unit could meet them lower on the mountain. Walter looked at Cole. You were living up there, weren't you? Cole's eyes shifted toward the windshield. Outside, the mountain had disappeared behind white darkness. His backpack sat between his boots. Everything he owned fit inside it. For tonight, he said. Walter watched him for a moment, then placed one weathered hand on Atlas's head. No, before tonight. Cole said nothing. The heater fan hummed. Atlas turned from Walter and rested his muzzle against Cole's thigh. Walter understood anyway. When they reached the lower road, red emergency lights flickered through falling snow. Paramedics transferred Walter onto a stretcher, but as they rolled him toward the ambulance, his hand slipped from Atlas's fur. The shepherd followed until Cole caught his harness. Stay. Atlas stood rigid, watching the doors. Walter lifted his head. Cole. Cole stepped closer. That house was mine. The words landed quietly beneath the hiss of falling snow. My father built the original shelter into that mountain. I kept it because I couldn't bear to sell it. Walter looked toward Atlas. I went back to protect a place nobody was using and nearly died behind its wall. A paramedic adjusted the blanket around his shoulders. Walter continued. Then a man with nowhere to sleep walked into it and saved me because his dog refused to walk away. Cole lowered his eyes to Atlas. The shepherd's coat was still damp, his paws muddy from the passage, but his gaze remained fixed on Walter. You don't owe me anything, Cole said. I know. Walter reached inside his coat and removed a brass key on a worn leather loop. He pressed it into Cole's palm. Cold metal. Scratched edges. The same kind of key Cole had seen hanging beside the house's old pantry door. The mountain house needs rebuilding, Walter said. But there's a caretaker cabin 8 miles down the property road. Dry roof. Wood stove. 2 bedrooms. Cole tried to return the key. Walter closed Cole's fingers around it. I'm not paying a debt. I'm asking for help. The ambulance doors stood open behind him, spilling white light across the snow. Help me rebuild the place. Atlas wouldn't leave. Cole looked at the key, then at his backpack, then down at the shepherd who had followed him through years of uncertainty without ever asking where they would sleep next. Atlas nudged Cole's closed fist once. Cole slipped the brass key into his pocket. We'll take care of it. Walter settled back onto the stretcher. The ambulance doors closed, leaving Cole and Atlas beneath the rotating red lights. For the first time in a long while, Cole was holding a key that opened somewhere he was expected to return to. 3 months later, Atlas stopped at the rebuilt wall and listened. Morning sunlight spilled through the mountain house windows, warm and gold across new pine flooring, while the smell of fresh-cut cedar mingled with coffee from the kitchen. Cole stood several feet behind him with a drill hanging loosely from one hand. He said nothing. Atlas touched his nose to the stone once. Then his tail moved. One slow sweep. No scratching. No bark. No refusal to leave. Cole crouched beside him and ran his fingers across the repaired section. They had not sealed it the old way. Walter had insisted on a reinforced steel access door behind the stone facing, with drainage channels, new supports, and an emergency alarm running from the maintenance chamber directly into the house. The wall still looked almost exactly as it had on the night Atlas found it. But now it could open. Gravel crunched outside. Atlas's ears lifted before Cole heard the truck. Walter stepped through the front door a minute later using a cane, his heeled legs still stiff but carrying his weight. Cold mountain air followed him inside, sharp with pine and damp earth. Atlas crossed the room at once. Walter bent carefully and buried both hands in the shepherd's thick coat. "You remember me?" Atlas leaned his entire shoulder against him. Walter laughed, the sound catching somewhere halfway out. Cole turned toward the stove and added another piece of wood. He gave them the moment. On the table lay the brass key Walter had handed him after the rescue. Cole had tried returning it twice. Walter had refused twice. "Caretaker cabin treating you all right?" Walter asked. Cole glanced through the window toward the smaller cabin visible beyond the trees. Its chimney released a thin ribbon of smoke into the clear sky. "Roof doesn't leak. Atlas approves." Walter nodded toward the repaired house. "And this place?" Cole looked around. They had spent weeks rebuilding it together with county inspectors and local contractors. Cole had hauled lumber, reinforced framing, cleared drainage, and restored the service passage Atlas had discovered. What had nearly become a tomb was safe again because one dog had refused to ignore what no human could hear. "It's ready," Cole said. Walter placed an envelope on the table. Cole did not touch it. "What's that?" "Caretaker agreement. Paid position. Cabin included." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "Walter, read the last line." Paper rasped beneath Cole's calloused fingers. The position had no expiration date. At the bottom, beneath Walter's signature, was one handwritten condition: Atlas remains on site. Cole looked down. Atlas sat between them, ears forward. Walter tapped the page. "I trust his judgment." Cole signed. That afternoon, they walked the mountain trail together. Snow still clung beneath shaded rocks, but meltwater ran bright beside the path, and chickadees called from the spruce branches overhead. At the old trail marker, Walter stopped. Cole could see the house above them now, its stone front repaired, its windows reflecting blue sky instead of storm. Atlas stood between the two men. Cole reached into his pocket and felt the brass key. Months earlier, he had entered that mountain with no address, no bed, and no certainty beyond the dog walking beside him. Atlas had stopped at one wall, and because Cole finally listened, Walter lived. Because Walter lived, Cole no longer slept wherever darkness found him. He had work, a cabin, a key, a place where Atlas's food bowl stayed beside his own boots every night. Walter continued down the trail. Cole followed, but Atlas remained still for one last second, looking back toward the wall hidden inside the mountain house. Cole whistled softly. "Home, buddy." Atlas turned immediately and ran to him, and Cole finally understood that the wall his dog refused to leave had never trapped his future behind it. It had been waiting there to give them both a way home.